everyone, welcome back to Prestige Academy's online lessons. This is Macroeconomics Class 4. In the last class, we went over monetary policy. We said that it was implemented by the central bank to influence unemployment and inflation. We also went over the tools it used to do so. Today we're going to go over something similar, fiscal policy. We're also going to review tax and spending multipliers, do a few practice questions, and go over the concept of automatic stabilizers. Alright, fiscal policy has a similar purpose to monetary policy. It's used to influence the nation's economy, and it uses government spending and taxes to do so. The main difference between fiscal policy and monetary policy that you absolutely have to remember is that fiscal policy is implemented by the government, whereas monetary policy is going to be implemented by the central bank. Before we get more into fiscal policy's tools, let's start with reviewing the circular flow diagram. We'll often see two types of this. The first one, the one that is currently on the screen, is a little bit simpler. It shows the interactions between factor markets, firms or businesses, goods and services markets, and households. Households are going to provide the resources factor markets need, which are going to then provide the resources firms need, which are going to provide the products that are sold in goods and services markets and bought by households. This is going to show the circulation of money in the economy. The second represents the same thing, but it accounts for a little bit more. This circular flow diagram includes the governments, financial markets, and the rest of the world. This is where things get a little bit more complicated. Households pay taxes to the government, and the government has transfer payments, which in this case is titled government services. For example, the coronavirus relief checks would be considered government transfers. They're putting the money directly into the people's pockets. The government also borrows and spends, shown by the green arrows. As a whole, this diagram is going to show the flow of money in an economy and account for all aspects of the GDP. Now let's get into how this is relevant to fiscal policy. We said that the tools the government uses to implement fiscal policy are taxes and government spending. Taxes are taking the money out of the economy, and spending is putting it back in. If you think back to monetary policy and the effects of increasing and decreasing the money supply, you'll remember that more money in an economy means more inflation. So we can reason that government spending is going to speed up the economy, just as buying bonds would. So increased government spending puts more money into the economy, which means it's going to be expansionary. It's going to be done to combat recessions. It's going to lower unemployment and increase inflation. The best example for the use of expansionary fiscal policy with government spending is the New Deal. Advocated by Keynes, and one of the major theories of Keynesian economics, it is believed that in times of low consumer spending, aka low demand, government spending should be increased to stimulate the economy. This is because government spending will, in theory, put more money into people's pockets, and with more money to spend, demand in the economy will increase, pulling the economy out of a depression. So in summary, increasing government spending is going to be expansionary as it gives people more money to spend, and decreasing government spending is going to be contractionary as it means there is less money in the economy. It is also important to note what's going to happen when the government increases government spending. Oftentimes, the government is going to borrow to account for the increase. When the government is borrowing and basically spending the money it doesn't have, it is in a deficit, and the action is called deficit spending. Deficit spending has two major effects. One, it generates debt. And two, it increases interest rates. This may then create inflation. Now let's look at the scenario on the loanable funds graph. When the government increases its spending to the point where it exceeds its revenues, it needs to borrow. Therefore, the demand for loanable funds is going to shift to the right. When the demand for loanable funds shifts, the new interest rate is going to be higher, and there is going to be a higher quantity of loanable funds in equilibrium. This increase in the interest rates is going to reduce the interest-sensitive private sector investment spendings. And this effect is going to be called crowding out. To give a definition, crowding out is when private investment by businesses and personal consumption is reduced because of a rise in interest rates caused by an increase in government spending that leads to deficit spending funded by borrowing. This simply means when the government spends money it doesn't have, interest rates are going to go up. And because people wouldn't want to take out money when there's a high interest rate, private investment is going to go down. So basically, the government spending is crowding out private investment. And that's how you can remember the name. Now let's move on to the second tool of fiscal policy, taxes. The relationship is pretty simple. When taxes are higher, people have less to spend. When taxes are lower, people have more to spend. So an increase in taxes is going to be contractionary, and a decrease in taxes is going to be expansionary. There are also formulas we can use to calculate the effects of a change in taxes or government spending. First, let's go over the multiplier effect that I think we already covered in the last class. The multiplier effect shows us that the maximum increase in GDP a single dollar will have is not going to be a single dollar. If someone spends $1 extra, this won't correspond to a single dollar increase in the GDP. That dollar will be someone's income. That person will then save some of it and spend the rest. And the amount spent will then be someone else's income. And this will go on again and again and again, leading to that money being magnified or multiplied. With taxes and spending, there's a similar thing going on. The formula for the tax multiplier is negative MPC divided by 1 minus MPC. MPC means marginal propensity to consume. A question will either give this to you or have you calculate it using the MPS, which stands for marginal propensity to save. MPC plus MPS is going to equal to 1, because these represent what people do with their money. They either consume it or they save it. So in total, it's going to be equal to 100% of people's money, or 1, simply. So if we are given the MPS in a question, we can use this formula to calculate the MPC and use that in our formula. This also means that if we just do simple algebra, do MPS and subtract MPC from both sides, we get MPS is equal to 1 minus MPC. And because we have 1 minus MPC in the denominator, we can rewrite this formula as negative MPC divided by MPS. And these two are going to mean the same exact thing. The tax multiplier tells us the final increase in real GDP that will occur as the result of a change in taxes. That means that if the government decides to lower taxes by 100 billion, that's not going to mean the GDP is increasing by 100 billion. It's going to be multiplied by the tax multiplier, and that's going to be the final change in the GDP. Now let's do a question to better understand this effect. Let's say we're given an ASAD graph like this. As you can see, the economy is operating below full potential and there's a negative output gap. This means if we were to use taxes, the government is going to reduce taxes to bring the economy back to full potential. We need to have a 40 billion increase in GDP. And we can calculate that by doing 50 billion minus 10 billion. And we're also given the MPC as 0.6. Alright, now first let's look at what this means. MPC of 0.6 means people are spending 60% and saving the other 40. How much, and the question we see here is, how much should we lower taxes to close this output gap? The first thing we need to do for this question is to calculate the tax multiplier. In order to do that, we use the formula. Formula was negative MPC divided by MPS. We're already given the MPC, so negative MPC is going to be negative 0.6. And we know that we can calculate the MPS by doing 1 minus MPC. 1 minus 0.6 is going to give us 0.4. Negative 0.6 divided by 0.4 is going to be negative 1.5. So we know that our tax multiplier is negative 1.5. After finding our tax multiplier, we're going to set up our equation. The change in GDP we're looking for, 40 billion, is going to equal to delta T, change in taxes, times the tax multiplier, which in this case is negative 1.5. Then it's just basic algebra. We divide both sides by negative 1.5. So delta T, the change in taxes we need, is going to equal to 40 billion divided by negative 1.5, which is approximately 6.7 billion, negative 26.7 billion. So that means we need to change taxes by negative 26.7 billion to increase the GDP by 40 billion. And why is this negative? Because we're doing expansionary monetary policy, bringing the GDP up. And with expansionary monetary policy, we know that we should be lowering taxes. And that negative basically symbolizes that. That negative means we're lowering taxes. So delta T being negative 26.7 billion means we're lowering taxes by 26.7 billion. And that's what the tax multiplier is. It's saying that if we want to increase GDP by 40 billion, we can't just cut $40 billion in taxes. We're going to cut 26.7, and with the tax multiplier, that's going to magnify and multiply and account for that 40 billion. Now let's look into government spending. What would we do with government spending in the same scenario? The multiplier for government spending, the spending multiplier, is 1 over NPS. And we just do the same thing we did with taxes. First, we find the multiplier. And second, we set up the equation. 1 over NPS. We're already given the MPC, and again, 1 minus MPC is going to be the MPS. So 1 minus 0.6 is going to give us 0.4. So our multiplier is 1 over 0.4, which is equal to 2.5. Notice that the spending multiplier is higher than the tax multiplier we calculated previously. This is because a change in government spending will always have more effect than the same change in taxes. So basically, the government spending is going to have more power. If you want to change the GDP a certain way, if you're changing government spending, it's going to have more effect than if you're increasing or changing the taxes by the same amount. Now let's set up our formula. We said that we wanted to increase GDP by 40 billion. That's going to equal to change in government spending times the multiplier. We found the multiplier to be 2.5, and let's just rewrite the equation. 40 billion equals delta government spending times 2.5. Divide both sides by 2.5. Change in government spending needed is going to be 40 billion divided by 2.5, which is equal to 16 billion. So what this means is that we need to increase government spending by 16 billion, and that's going to multiply and magnify and cause a 40 billion change in GDP, bringing us to full potential and long-run equilibrium. So just to review all of that, when we're calculating the effect of a change in taxes, you first find the tax multiplier, which is negative MPC divided by 1 minus MPC. And that tax multiplier can be rewritten as negative MPC divided by NPS. And they're going to mean the same thing. And after finding the tax multiplier, you set up this formula. The change in GDP we want is going to equal the change in taxes times tax multiplier. You can be given any two of these variables and you can find the other one. For example, sometimes it can give you the tax multiplier and the change in taxes, and using those you can calculate the change in output that's going to be cost. Or it can give you the output and the change in taxes and ask you to calculate the tax multiplier. In any of those cases, you just use this formula. And if you're calculating the effects of a change in government spending, you set up the multiplier as 1 over NPS, and then use that spending multiplier in this equation to, again, do the same thing as you would do in a change in taxes. All right, now let's move on to a concept called automatic stabilizers, which are exactly what they sound like. These automatic stabilizers are going to stabilize the economy by themselves without any additional authorization from the government. In the previous class, we said that the economy fluctuates. It goes up, down, up, down, up, down. And these automatic stabilizers are going to take effect when needed to control these fluctuations and basically stabilize the economy. One example of automatic stabilizers is progressive graduated income tax. As you earn a higher wage, a higher percentage of money is taken out of your paycheck. So in theory, if the economy is doing well and people start to earn more, a higher percentage of taxes is going to be collected, which serves to offset a portion of the fluctuations in the economy. This is considered an automatic stabilizer as no new bill or anything like that is needed. The tax basically rises and falls automatically if needed. Another example is the unemployment benefits and welfare. When the economy is doing bad, more people are on unemployment benefits. This causes an increase in government spending, which, as we covered previously, is going to be expansionary, again offsetting a portion of the fluctuations in the economy without a new policy. The benefit of these automatic stabilizers is that they are timely. They don't require a new bill to be passed or written. They simply take effect by themselves when they're needed. Before I go, I think it is also important to mention the consumption function. The consumption function describes the relationship between consumption and disposable income. Introduced by John Keynes, it was used to develop the concept of a government spending multiplier. Keynes argued the function could be used to track and predict total aggregate consumption expenditures. This function suggests consumer spending is wholly determined by income and the changes in income. If this suggestion is true, aggregate savings could increase proportionally as gross domestic product grows over time. This then creates a mathematical relationship between disposable income and consumer spending on aggregate levels. All right. That is it for today. In the next class, I'm going to go over absolute and comparative advantage. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next lesson.